Well, today I have a guest who is a little different in terms of his background. He's not one of these established internet polyglots. He's a person that I met on Twitter who is interested in vocabulary acquisition, who has a podcast, and I just thought that would be an interesting person to talk to on my channel. So, welcome, Keith. Good morning. I don't know if it's morning where you are, but it's morning here.
It's still morning.
Still morning.
Yeah.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. When I responded to your tweet on Twitter, I was pretty blown away. I've actually looked up to you for a little bit for these past couple of years when I was learning Spanish, because I listened and watched to some of your videos, some of your older ones when you were talking about language acquisition. So it's great to be here. But as far as my background, so I am a math teacher currently. I've been learning languages. The first language that I started learning in high school was French. Did about 2 years in French and got to college, actually tested into Japanese. Got thrown in, pushed in. Wasn't very good at it, at least I didn't feel like it. Went on an immersion in college and I just kind of fell in love with the language because I really felt, I was like, whoa, I can actually learn a foreign language. This is pretty cool. And since then, I've just kind of dabbled in a few languages, but I did decide to become a Spanish court interpreter about 4 years ago. So I obviously needed to learn a large amount of Spanish for that, and I became pretty much professionally fluent in Spanish to where I can use it now on the job. I did some freelance interpreting at the time. Obviously, I'm a teacher now, so it didn't work out for like the long run, but I'm fluent in Spanish, and since then I've gone on. I'm actually currently probably low intermediate level in Mandarin Chinese. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So okay. So Spanish. So Spanish is fluent.
Yeah.
Mandarin Chinese is low intermediate. Are there any? And Japanese was kind of put on pause.
Yeah.
French is still there in the background, or maybe?
No. French. I had to say I don't remember very much from high school.
So, and of course, where we connected on Twitter was around the discussion of vocabulary acquisition.
Yeah.
And did I understand that you have written a book?
I have, yeah. The book's called The Tower of Babbling, and basically what it is kind of a summation of all of my experiences learning languages. And what I wanted to do was because when I was learning for my interpreting class, I never found resources for someone who went from like dabbling to like fluent, professionally fluent. So that's basically what I wanted to do with my book. I wanted to take out like all the anecdotes, no fluff, just completely actionable steps. What do I need to do? What do I need to not do in order to organize my language learning better?
Now, you have a podcast. Perhaps you should tell us the name of your podcast.
The name of the podcast.
Find it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. The name of the podcast is the same as the book. It's the Tower of Babbling podcast.
Right.
And essentially what I didn't really have a plan. Like if you listen to the first episode, I literally say, I just have the book with me and I press record, So, basically I'm just reading the book and then I'm providing kind of like, author anecdotes, kind of author's notes, if you will, as I read. And then sometimes after I read, I focus on key points that I would want to know if I were studying whatever language at that point.
Of course, the podcast then it's not word for word the book.
No.
It's on its own. And there are no transcripts to the podcast.
No transcripts at this time, no.
Okay. No, I only ask that because I find very often podcasts are such tremendous language learning resources. And I use them for, Persian and whatever, Arabic. And so often, in fact, in most cases, there are no transcripts. If we had transcripts to your podcast, we could put them into link as lessons, and people could learn from them. So they'd learn about language learning and they'd learn English. For those people I think who are learning English.
And that is definitely something that I would like to look into. Actually, I was experimenting with using Google Docs. They have a voice translation feature where you can basically shadow the podcast and then it just records it right then and there. So I did that a little bit, and that's.
But you'd have to go back in to correct it, right?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So now on the subject of vocabulary acquisition, do you refer specifically to your Spanish experience, or you talk about other languages as well?
No, I talk about other languages, and in my book it's prevalent really Spanish and Japanese because I didn't mention it earlier, but I have a minor in Japanese, which Yeah, it's probably best as a minor. I'm glad I didn't major in it because my Japanese isn't that good. Um, but yeah, I do talk about other languages, and my book is meant to be a general resource, meaning that you can slap any language, whatever, Congolese, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and that if it's meant to be a structural thing. So yeah, I definitely pull from my experiences learning all languages.
Can you share with our viewers, some of the key points? Like, what are some of the principles or things that we need to be aware of? And because everybody, I believe when I started Link, I said the most important single measure of our potential in a language is how many words we know.
Absolutely, yeah.
That because you can be very good at saying a few things. Hello, how are you? My name is. If
Sure.
you don't have a lot of words, you're not going to understand very much. You can't
Absolutely.
read. You can't say
Yeah.
much. So, and the more words you have, and typically we acquire words through typically a lot of reading and listening. So it's kind of a measure of the fact that you have been engaged with this language. To me,
I
it's
agree.
such a tremendously important number. How many words do you know?
Yeah.
Passively, I'm talking about, not necessarily
Yeah.
because you're going to use a small subset of those. So, question. So, therefore, what are some of your principal sort of observations, recommendations when it comes to acquiring words?
Good question. And my absolutely number one thing anybody asks me about learning languages and learning a large amount of vocabulary is having a system for vocabulary. And of course, you have Link, and I've actually used Link, and I like the way it keeps track of the words because like you said, it is a fantastic measure. But that was one of the big issues that I had early on was I didn't have a way to capture all of these words, and I've got the spirals behind me to prove it. Basically, I have 6 spirals full of Spanish vocabulary. Some of it's legal vocabulary, some of it's medical, some of it's just vocabulary I picked up watching Netflix. But I didn't have a way to get it in. I would write it down, and because I'm a big writer, and I agree with that kinesthetic kind of inclusion, that element of getting vocabulary in. But I didn't have a system to go back and review these things. So I would hear the word and be like, I don't know that word. Write it down, but set it and forget it. And I forgot it most of the times. So really, it was once I got that system in place and kind of found a way to okay, I'm going to get it down and then I'm going to review it again. That's when the magic started happening and my vocabulary kind of exploded from there.
And can you share with us some elements of what that system is?
Yeah, sure. So really, what I try and do is I try and include several aspects of like I mentioned, the kinesthetic. So I'm trying to remember how many actual elements that I have, but the elements to learning the vocabulary. So I talk about the kinesthetic. I talk about having an emotional connection. That's one of the things I mentioned in my book.
Yeah.
Is why do we remember curse words and offensive lines? Those are the first things that people kind of pick up in languages because they're kind of emotional. Anytime you see them in context, they're kind of just blurted out, and they're like, whoa, this is really kind of a shock to your brain. So having that emotional connection really helps solidify it. And then I also try and incorporate a visual element. So one of the things I'll do is I'll find a word that I don't know, and then I'll go and just Google images and look it up in Spanish, or I'll look it up in whatever language, and I'll be like, oh, so that's what it actually looks like. And because it's on Google, probably a native speaker posted it in that language. So I get more of a sense. I can kind of have another hook to hook the language on. So I used to actually do all of this through Anki. I feel like Anki was a very powerful tool because I could make flashcards that would have the English, the language I was trying to learn, which was Spanish at the time, and then I could have a picture in there that I could place from online. So when I bring all of these things together, it really makes for some powerful vocabulary acquisition. You're not going to easily forget some of these words.
Right. I think it's very important that I say if you're going to succeed in language learning, you have to be confident that you can do it.
Yes.
You have to be confident that it's worthwhile doing.
Yeah.
And you have to be confident that the method you're using works.
Yes.
And I think that's where language learning is an individual journey. I always say, don't criticize other people. Don't
Absolutely.
say that, your Japanese is lousy or
Yeah.
you made a mistake in your French.
Of course.
Everybody does their own thing. Everybody derives pleasure out of learning the language, out of what they have achieved, and finding their own way. So, personally, I would not. Maybe I'm too lazy to do all of the things that you're suggesting that people do, but I know a lot of people like doing those kinds of things and derive tremendous benefit from them.
Absolutely.
And I think to point out what these different approaches are and how they can be used is tremendously useful. Yeah. So that's in your book, and your book is listed on your podcast website.
It's on my website. Yes, it's keithhayden.net. Mm-hmm.
And in your podcast, you talk about some of these methods, or what do you talk about, or what are you going to be talking about in your podcast?
Yeah, so in the podcast episodes, what I do is the structure is always kind of the same. I introduce the topic that I'm going to talk about, and then I kind of say, kind of where we're going, and then I'll read that section of the book, and then sometimes throughout the reading, and then other times afterwards, I kind of break down I kind of pull out the meat, if you will. I kind of pull out exactly, okay, here's what you could go do right now. Here's what I had trouble with when I was really thinking about this aspect of language learning, and I feel like that's what other people probably struggle with too, maybe on their own. But yeah, and then I also started including some Twitter polls and things like that. I'll ask questions like, how do you do this? I did one on grammar a couple of days ago, and I did a Twitter poll, how do people study grammar? And then I talk about those. And then I try and give some homework too, in typical teacher fashion.
Yeah. What's interesting is you said, we were just talking before we started, that part of your motivation for starting the podcast is because everybody's locked down and we got to find things useful to do, and B, you want to connect with other people who are in a similar situation. And I think that's really valuable. We at Link, we started our live streams with that in mind. Like people, the world hasn't come to an end, and
absolutely not.
We have different ways of connecting, and people are many people are interested in learning languages and looking for their own approaches and stuff. And I think this is tremendously valuable. And podcast has the advantage that people can just pick up the podcast and go off and do whatever they're doing, and they can be listening to your podcast and getting a lot of valuable input.
Absolutely.
And as I say, eventually, if you have transcripts, we could put those as lessons into Link, and people, non-native speakers of English, could then be, getting sort of a double whammy here, learning the language and learning your methods. Where are you located, by the way?
I'm in California.
Oh, whereabouts?
Near Sacramento, North California.
Yeah, my wife and I were in Palm Springs, and we got out 21st of March.
Oh, okay, wow.
It was getting more and more difficult to get out, but...
Yeah.
Well, I think that's wonderful. I think, the whole movement towards online instruction, people providing, language-related services and teaching and resources online, it was growing before, but I think it's going to continue to grow.
Oh, yeah.
I think the world economy is going to have to shift to more of a, more remote type activities for quite a while. I don't see us quickly getting back to. Yeah, I mean, as a teacher, so you've been affected. You were what, a high school teacher?
Yeah, so actually I was at a placement at a middle school in my town. So I did a high school the first 2 months of this year in January, February, and then I transitioned to middle school. I had only been there 2 weeks before the shutdown happened. But I like that you mentioned the transition to online, because I actually just finished planning a lesson for our class for next week. This is technically spring break for the kids down here, so we're not doing it. We're honoring the spring break, even though they could technically get on, right? But we gave them that spring break, and then next week we're going to have our first kind of real online lesson. And it's taken a while for the school to adjust, and my school is probably no different than many other schools around the country that are having a hard time.
In math.
This is in math.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You have a big interest in languages, and yet you're a math teacher. So
you
kind of cover the whole waterfront. One of the things I was talking to my son Mark, who's kind of the guy who runs Link, and we were saying that a lot of the approaches to sort of online teaching from, say, the established K-12 system, and also for universities and colleges, is basically to take the classroom and put it online.
Right.
And that there hasn't been a lot of developing of, I mean, there is the famous Khan Academy, which is pretty good.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, but I wonder if, do you see that changing where teachers are going to be a little more creative in how they approach their online instruction, or is it just going to be, classroom is online now rather than... Yeah.
So happy you asked this question, because this is a question that I've been grappling with actually very recently. Because of my requirement to become a teacher, I have to satisfy certain lesson requirements. I have to make certain things happen during these lessons. I can't just press record and,
right.
whatever may happen. I can't do that. So I have really been trying to think of a way, and I have basically a supervisor teacher who's helping me, and with her, we've been trying to come up with a way. How do we hold the kids accountable online? Because when we're in a classroom environment, regular physical classroom environment, it's easy to give them a test or give them a quiz or give them a warm-up. You can't really do that online. You kind of have to change the way you think about assessments, the way you think about how you're going to receive feedback, how you're going to tell that they're actually learning. So I 100% agree, and telling you that all teachers are going to have to adjust. Like, you can't just take the book and take it online. Like,
Absolutely.
You could, but I don't think it would be very effective.
And, there's a couple of elements too. I was actually listening to a podcast in Arabic about, going online. Of course, in the Arabic world, they don't have the resources that you have in the United States or Canada or elsewhere, where everybody has a computer and everybody has a printer and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there were those reasons why they were at a disadvantage. And the kids are unhappy. They're at home. They want to go to school. One of the things they mentioned, which I think is very important, is the classroom is not just a place where instruction takes place. It's a place where people socialize.
Absolutely.
They socialize with each other.
Yeah.
They socialize with the teacher in some way. The teacher, in fact, is I wouldn't say a source of discipline, but the teacher is kind of looking to make sure they're working.
Oh, yeah.
So this whole social aspect now, and particularly kids connecting with each other and so forth, that's got to be part of the whole thing if you take instruction online. And has that come up in your discussions?
It hasn't, but that is something that I've thought about, because especially now working in a middle school, it's actually more so going down from, it's weird because you would think, like, you see all the high school movies and you think, oh, high school drama and all that stuff. But middle school is where they are just learning those things. They are just kind of learning, how do I distinguish myself socially, and what type of person do I want to be? And you see them going through that experimental phase. So they definitely really need that social aspect at that developmental age. And yeah, that's something that's difficult to account for, right? It's something that's difficult to replace online. And because I know my school, we're not factoring that in. We basically have enough time to check and see if they did what we wanted them to do, which we gave them lessons and packets ahead of time. And then we have time to maybe teach a little bit, but that part's not built in yet. So we haven't gotten to where we're taking accountability.
I'm sure that all of these things are going to evolve.
Oh, yeah.
And there'll be some brilliant ideas. And I think we're in a world where people share things more, so that if somebody in Baltimore comes up with a solution, you'll be picking it up and sharing it around. So I'm sure we could talk forever, but it's been a very interesting discussion. Maybe we can introduce Link in the classroom in some way. There are some teachers using it. So thank you very much for this interview. And
thank you.
Hopefully we can connect again sometime.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you, Keith. And I'll leave a connection, the link to your podcast in the description box.
Sure. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.